I still remember the sting of ammonia on my hands that night, the smell of floor wax clinging to my clothes, and the echo of 20 so-called experts shouting through the frosted glass of the conference room. I was 29, a cleaning lady in a world of tailored suits and polished shoes, invisible unless someone spilled coffee. My name is Valentina, and this is the story of how the floor I scrubbed every night became the stage where my life twisted into something I never imagined: betrayal, revelation, and the kind of heartbreak that doesn't heal without leaving a scar. They said 20 engineers couldn't solve the equation on the glowing whiteboard. 20 experts trained in the finest universities paid more in a year than I could hope to earn in 5. Their failure filled the air like smoke drifting out into the hallway where I pushed my cart with its squeaky wheel. I wasn't supposed to notice. I was supposed to mop, polish empty trash bins and move on. But I've never been the kind of woman who could ignore noise when silence was needed. When they finally left, exhausted and defeated, I stepped into the empty room. The pizza boxes still reeked of grease. The coffee cups sat abandoned like corpses of ideas that had gone nowhere. And the equation, the monster that had broken 20 experts, still glared at me from the screen. I picked up a dry cloth, meaning only to erase it. But then I paused. The numbers didn't look impossible. They looked overcomplicated, as if dressed up to impress instead of stripped down to truth. I frowned, biting my lip. 2 steps back? 3. My body leaned against the cart, while my eyes traced the lines of symbols. Something inside me stirred a muscle memory from 2 years of engineering school I had once loved, but had to abandon when tuition outweighed survival. My mom's illness, my sister's future, my own hunger, they had all pressed down harder than equations ever could. But that knowledge hadn't left me. It was still there, buried under calloused hands and endless nights with a mop. So I picked up a marker. My fingers trembled, but not from fear. A slash here, a diagonal there, a substitution that seemed obvious once I saw it. In less than a minute, the tangled path became clear. I stood there staring at what I had written, a tiny spark of pride warming my chest. "And that's done," I whispered, winking at the mop as though it were my only witness. But I wasn't alone. "Who did this?" The voice came from the door, sharp as steel. I spun around, my heart nearly leaping out of my chest. There he stood, Richard Carter, the CEO himself. Tall, immaculate eyes, colder than the glass towers he owned. The kind of man who never noticed women like me, except to demand we clean faster. I tried to joke, pointing at the mop. "It was Maria Clara. She's brilliant." His silence forced me to backpedal. "Just kidding. It was me." He stepped closer, eyes darting between the board and my face. His lips moved without sound as he traced the solution I had scrawled in red. "This is impossible," he murmured. "None of our consultants thought of this shortcut." I shrugged, trying to appear casual, though my pulse hammered in my throat. Maybe they're too busy looking smart to see what's simple. His gaze snapped back to mine, something flickering there, curiosity, maybe even respect. And for the first time, I saw his perfect mask crack, just slightly. "Just, where did you learn this?" he asked. "I studied engineering for 2 years," I said softly. "Had to stop when my mom got sick. Couldn't afford to keep going." "You wouldn't know how that feels, would you? You're rich." He blinked, taken aback. I had spoken to him without fear, without flattery, just honesty. It startled him. And in that moment, something shifted. That night, instead of erasing my solution, he ordered it kept on the board for the morning team. He told me to attend the meeting as well, which felt absurd. A janitor sitting beside engineers and directors. Yet I agreed, mostly out of curiosity, partly out of stubborn pride. The next morning, my heart thumped wildly as I pushed my cart into the boardroom. Suits filled the table. Tablets gleamed like weapons. And then, me Valentina Ramirez uniform, neat sneakers scuffed, carrying not a briefcase but a bucket. The eyes that turned toward me ranged from confusion to disdain. But Richard gestured calmly to the seat beside him. "Sit," he said. I made a joke about leaving my cart near the door so it wouldn't feel left out. A ripple of chuckles broke the tension. Then the questions came. Where had I learned? Why did I think the equation was too complicated? I answered, simply comparing it to cleaning a floor. Sometimes you don't need 3 products. A damp cloth is enough. More laughter, but also nods. Even the technical director confirmed my solution was correct, more efficient than theirs. In that room of gray suits, my voice rang different. It wasn't polished or professional, it was human. And for reasons I didn't yet understand, that made all the difference. But what I didn't know then was how quickly admiration could turn into envy, how respect could sour into resentment, and how stepping into that room would not only change my future, but also uncover betrayals, wounds, and truths long buried. The meeting should have ended with polite applause, maybe a pat on the back, and then everyone forgetting me the way they always had. But it didn't. Something changed in that room when I sat beside Richard Carter, the CEO, as though my very presence had tilted the balance of power. I could feel the stares burning into me, some curious, some mocking, and others resentful. The technical director cleared his throat, unwilling to admit the truth, but unable to deny it either. The solution is correct. Cleaner than anything we've tried. His voice dragged like a reluctant confession. Richard glanced at me with something unreadable in his eyes. Cleaner. He echoed, his lips twitching into a half smile. Fitting, isn't it? A few nervous laughs rippled across the room, but I caught the daggered looks from men in suits who had spent days wrestling with that problem. Their pride had been shattered in less than a minute by someone who polished their floors. After the meeting, Richard asked me to stay. The others filed out, some shaking their heads, some whispering. I busied myself stacking empty cups just to keep my hands steady. You embarrassed them, he said finally. I didn't mean to, I whispered. I just solved it. And that's exactly why it matters, he replied. His gaze lingered on me in tense measuring. What's your name? Valentina Ramirez. He nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory. You're not invisible anymore, Valentina. Those words should have been a gift, but instead they felt like the opening of a cage door, terrifying in its own way. The days that followed were nothing like before. I was pulled into more meetings, asked questions, sometimes praised, often dismissed. Some smiled to my face but sneered the moment I left. The janitor, who had outsmarted the experts, had become a story, and stories have a way of spreading like wildfire. One evening, as I emptied bins on the executive floor, I overheard two voices behind the frosted glass of a corner office. She'll ruin everything, one of them hissed. She's a distraction. Richard's fascinated by her, and it's making him reckless. The words struck me harder than I expected. Reckless, fascinated, as if my worth was tied only to how much I unsettled the man at the top. That night, I cried in the bathroom, muffling my sobs with paper towels. I hadn't asked for this war. I just wanted to work, to provide, to stay afloat. But fate had a cruel sense of humor, dangling respect in front of me only to replace it with resentment. And Richard, he didn't make things easier. One afternoon, he appeared in the janitor's closet where I was restocking supplies. His presence filled the narrow space, his cologne clashing with the scent of bleach. You don't belong here, he said quietly. My chest tightened. I know, I don't belong anywhere, really. No, he insisted. I mean, you don't belong in this closet pushing this cart. You belong out there. He gestured toward the glass towers and humming offices. His words stirred something dangerous in me, Hope. Hope is a fragile thing, sharp-edged, and I knew better than to let it cut me. Still, I carried his words like a secret flame. But not everyone was blind to it. Evelyn, the vice president of operations. A woman with hair as sharp as her smile cornered me in the hallway one evening. Her heels clicked against the marble as she approached, her eyes cold. You think he sees you as an equal? She asked, her tone dripping with disdain. You're entertainment, Valentina. A novelty. And when he's finished, you'll go back to scrubbing floors. Her words sliced deep, reopening wounds I thought had scarred over. My father's abandonment, my mother's tears, the professors who had once told me I didn't belong in engineering because I was too poor, too female, too ordinary. I didn't answer her. I couldn't. But that night, as I watched my reflection in the darkened windows of the skyscraper, I swore to myself that I wouldn't let Evelyn or anyone else write my ending. What I didn't know was that the deeper I stepped into Richard Carter's world, the more I'd uncover the betrayals, the secrets, the truth about his empire, and the role I was never supposed to play. Because sometimes the dirtiest floors aren't the ones you mop. They're the ones you're invited to walk on. I began to notice the small things first, the way conversations would hush when I entered a room, the way files vanished from desks if I came too close. People who once ignored me now watched me like a storm gathering on the horizon. Even Lucy, my closest coworker on the cleaning staff, whispered one night while wringing out a mop. "Careful, Valentina. You're in their world now, and their world doesn't forgive intruders." I laughed it off, but her words clung to me. By day, I scrubbed floors and fetched supplies, and by night, I stood in rooms where decisions worth millions were being made. The two lives bled into each other until I hardly knew which one was real. Richard was the tether between them. He sought me out sometimes with questions about equations, other times with something gentler, almost like confession. "They call me ruthless," he told me one evening as we overlooked the city skyline from his office. "But what they don't know is that ruthless men bleed too, just in private." His vulnerability unsettled me more than his power ever had. For years I had armored myself against cruelty, not tenderness, and yet when he looked at me I felt seen in a way I hadn't since my mother was alive. But admiration is a dangerous currency in a place built on envy. One morning, as I polished the brass handles on the boardroom doors, Evelyn brushed past me with her usual perfume of roses and poison. She leaned close enough that only I could hear. "He's making a fool of himself over you. And when he falls, you'll be dragged down with him." I kept scrubbing my hands steady, though my stomach churned. I told myself she was bluffing, but a part of me knew she was right. Power never shifts without blood. The blood came sooner than I expected. I was returning Richard's coffee mug to the executive lounge when I saw a folder lying open on the counter. My eyes caught the words before I could stop myself. Internal audit. Suspicious transactions. Pages filled with numbers, arrows, and names, one of them, Richard, circled in red. I froze, the weight of betrayal pressing into my chest. Had he been lying to me all along? Was I just a pawn in a game of deception far bigger than I could comprehend? Before I could slip away, a voice cut through the silence. "Curiosity is dangerous, Valentina." Evelyn stood in the doorway, her smile sharp as broken glass. She stepped closer, her heels clicking like a countdown. "Now you see what he really is. A thief, a manipulator, and you're just the naive girl who thinks she's special." Her words stung, but it was the look in her eyes that unsettled me most. Triumph. As if she had been waiting for this moment, waiting for me to discover the truth and crumble. I fled before Richard could see me, but his shadow followed me everywhere that night. I scrubbed floors with tears burning my eyes, my reflection in the polished marble staring back like an accusation. When he found me later in the janitor's closet, I couldn't meet his gaze. "Is it true?" I whispered. "Are you everything they say?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed the door behind him, his presence filling the cramped space. "It depends," he said finally, his voice low. "Do you believe them? Or do you believe me?" I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But the folder, the numbers, Evelyn's cruel laughter, they all pressed against me until I could hardly breathe. That night, lying awake in my tiny apartment, I clutched my mother's rosary and begged for clarity. I had stepped into his world by accident, but now I was entangled in a web of secrets and lies. And deep down I knew betrayal always leaves stains you can't wash away. The days that followed were suffocating. Every hallway in that skyscraper felt like a trap, every polished floor a mirror reflecting back a woman who no longer recognized herself. I was no longer invisible, I was exposed. And exposure, I learned, was far more dangerous than anonymity. Richard tried to draw me closer. He called me into his office under the guise of helping with numbers, but his questions weren't about equations anymore. "Why do you trust people so easily?" he asked one afternoon, his eyes steady on mine. I laughed bitterly, because I've never had the luxury not to. When you're poor, trust isn't a choice, it's survival. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with a strange intensity. "That's what makes you powerful, Valentina. You see what others don't. You cut through the noise." But his words couldn't silence the voice of doubt Evelyn had planted in me. Each time I looked at him, I saw the folder again circled, named "Suspicious Transactions." Could a man speak of honesty while hiding hands dipped in fraud? Evelyn seemed to sense the fracture growing inside me. One evening she cornered me again, this time in the deserted elevator lobby. Her reflection in the glass gleamed like a predator's. "He'll use you just like he uses everyone," she said, her voice a poisonous whisper. "You think you're special because you solved a puzzle. You're not. You're disposable." I wanted to fight back to hurl words that would cut her as deeply as she cut me, but my throat closed around the truth. Part of me feared she was right. The breaking point came at a gala. Richard insisted I attend, draping me in a borrowed gown that felt like borrowed skin. The chandeliers burned above us as the city's most powerful circled with champagne flutes and sharp smiles. I clung to the edges of the room, watching him glide through conversations with ease. Then Evelyn took the stage. With perfect poise, she tapped the microphone, her voice slicing through the music. Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that tonight we celebrate under a shadow. Our esteemed CEO has been under investigation for creative accounting. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My heart dropped as she held up the very folder I had seen. Numbers don't lie, and neither do I. All eyes turned to Richard. For a fleeting second, his gaze found mine across the glittering hall. There was no fear in his eyes, only defiance. He didn't deny it. He didn't explain. He simply raised his glass in a silent toast as if daring the world to challenge him. In that moment, I felt the ground split beneath me. Betrayal and admiration collided in my chest until I couldn't breathe. Had I defended a liar? Or had I underestimated a man fighting enemies far more dangerous than I understood? I fled before the night ended, the gown heavy on my shoulders, my lungs aching for air. Alone in the dark streets, I replayed every moment, every glance, every word. And the truth was unavoidable. I was caught between two versions of Richard Carter, the man who saw me and the man who might destroy me. The question that haunted me was not whether he had betrayed me. It was whether I could survive the answer when it finally came. I didn't go back to the skyscraper the next morning. I couldn't. My hands shook too badly to hold a mop, and the thought of walking those polished floors while whispers curled behind my back made my chest tighten until I couldn't breathe. Instead, I stayed in my tiny apartment, the blinds drawn, my mother's rosary tangled between my fingers like a lifeline. But Richard found me. The knock on my door came just after midnight, sharp and unrelenting. When I opened it, he stood there in his immaculate suit, though his tie hung loose and his eyes carried the exhaustion of someone fighting wars on too many fronts. "You ran," he said simply. "I had to," I whispered. "They all think you're guilty. And maybe they're right." His jaw clenched, but his voice softened. "Do you think I'm guilty?" The question shattered me, because I didn't know. I thought of the folder, Evelyn's triumphant smirk, the whispers in the hallways. But I also thought of the man who sat with me in the janitor's closet, who admitted that ruthless men bleed too. I don't know what to believe anymore. I admitted, tears stinging my eyes. All I know is that you pulled me into your world, and now I don't even recognize my own reflection. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Evelyn is playing a game, Valentina. She's been siphoning money for years, hiding behind my name. The audit you saw, she planted it for you, to break you, to make you doubt me." The words hit me like thunder, shaking everything I thought I knew. Was it true? Could Evelyn be that calculating? My heart wanted to believe him, but my mind screamed caution. "You expect me to just take your word for it?" I asked bitterly. He didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and placed it in my hand. "Proof. Everything you need to see. But once you know the truth, you can't go back to being invisible. You'll be part of this war whether you want it or not." That night after he left, I stared at the flash drive for hours. It sat on my table like a loaded gun, daring me to pull the trigger. Finally, I slid it into my old laptop. Files bloomed across the screen, ledgers, emails, transactions, and buried among them, Evelyn's name appeared again and again, attached to accounts dripping with stolen millions. My stomach turned. She had been right about one thing: numbers don't lie. But she had twisted the story, weaponized it against me, against him. The next morning, I returned to the skyscraper. My legs trembled as I rode the elevator up, but when the doors opened, I walked with my head high. Evelyn was waiting in the lobby, her smile cold. "Well," she purred. "Look who crawled back. Did you enjoy your taste of fantasy? Ready to admit you're out of your depth?" I met her gaze, my voice steady, though my heart thundered. "I know what you did, and so does he." For the first time, her smile faltered, just slightly, but enough. Enough to tell me I wasn't crazy, enough to tell me the war was real. Richard appeared, then his presence filling the room like a storm. He didn't even look at Evelyn. His eyes found mine, steady, unshaken. "It's time," he said. "Time." And I knew in that moment that everything was about to break wide open. The boardroom was colder than usual, though the morning sun poured through the tall glass windows. Directors lined the table, their faces a mask of impatience and curiosity. I sat near the corner, heart hammering so loudly I thought it would echo against the polished wood. Richard stood at the head of the table, calm, immovable, like a man who had already prepared his own verdict. Evelyn sat opposite him, her lipstick sharp, her smile sharper, a predator who thought she had already won. "Mr. Carter," one director began, "there are serious allegations." Richard raised a hand, "And there is proof." That was my cue. With trembling fingers, I slid the flash drive into the projector. Files burst onto the screen, transactions, transfers, hidden accounts. And name after name, one in particular, repeated like a curse. Evelyn Blackwell. Gasps rippled through the room. The directors leaned forward, eyes narrowing, as numbers filled the screen like fire consuming dry grass. Evelyn's composure cracked just for a second before she forced a laugh. Fabrications. Clearly, the janitor is desperate to play detective. Her voice faltered when Richard leaned across the table, his tone as sharp as glass. Fabrications. Then explain these transfers to your personal account. Explain why every missing cent in the last 5 years leads back to you. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Evelyn's mask slipped completely, now her face twisted with rage. She turned on me, her voice a venomous hiss. "You think you've won because you scrubbed floors and stumbled onto his pity? You're nothing, Valentina. Nothing." Her words cut deep, but they no longer had the power to break me. I stood, my voice steady. "If being nothing means seeing the truth while you drown in lies, then yes, I am nothing. But today everyone sees who you really are." The board voted within the hour. Evelyn was removed, her empire of deceit collapsing around her like a house of cards. She stormed out of the room, her heels striking the marble one last time, leaving behind only the echo of her downfall. Afterward, the directors filed out, murmuring to each other. Richard stayed behind, his hands pressed against the table. When he finally looked up at me, the weight in his eyes was heavier than victory. "You saved me," he said softly. "No," I whispered. "You saved yourself. I just refused to stay silent." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The skyscraper hummed around us, the city alive outside. But inside the room, there was only the quiet relief of battles survived. Yet survival comes at a price. I lost my invisibility that day. I could no longer fade into the background, could no longer pretend I was just a woman with a mop and calloused hands. I had stepped into their world, faced betrayal, and torn away the mask of power. But more than anything, I had learned this: sometimes revenge is not loud or violent. Sometimes it is simply the act of standing, of refusing to bow, of speaking truth when silence is demanded. I went home that night and kissed my sister's forehead, whispering that we would never again let the world tell us we didn't belong. I was no longer just Valentina the cleaning lady. I was Valentina, the woman who had faced the fire and walked out carrying the truth. If my story touched something inside you, if it reminded you that even the smallest voice can shatter the tallest walls, then I hope you'll stand with me. Like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment telling me the moment you refuse to stay silent. Because sometimes the world needs to hear your story too.